So, guys, it seems like more and more churches are now really starting to see the need for reaching young adults in their church.
Mm-hmm.
And while people see that need, they wonder, though, where do we even start? Where do we even begin? We want to do something, but where do we start? And Randy, you've been a young adult pastor for about 9 years now.
Right.
What is maybe that first thing somebody's wondering, where do we even begin?
It's probably the biggest question I get asked is, I want to do this. I feel like God wants to do this in our group. Where do I begin? And usually follow up. So we start with what you got. The first response is, well, I don't have anything.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, time out. Obviously, there's some spiritual stuff going on here. If God wants you to do something, He's going to give you the things to do what He's called you to do. And so everybody reads the books and all the stuff, and they think big, and I say, start small. And so my first thing is always get out a blank piece of paper. And I want you to make a list of every young adult in your church. And their first response after that is what? We don't have any young adults in your church. I say, no, time out. Now think about it. Usually they're a young adult.
Yeah.
9 times out of 10, they're a young adult. I said, well, put your name down. You got one.
Yeah.
Start here. And I even a few months ago told a girl, I said, I want you to do is I want you to go stand on the sanctuary steps of your church when church starts, and when they're shaking hands. I want you to look and write down the name of every young adult and come back to me. And the girl who had none had 14 when she wrote down their names.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's just looking and intentionally looking at what you've got.
All right, so someone has out a piece of paper and a pen and a pencil, and they're about to write down a list of all the young adults in their church. How do you determine or how do you define who these young adults even are?
Yeah, Ryan, for us that was done through going to lunch. When my wife and I about 12 years ago had a burden in our hearts for young adults, we would come to church every Sunday and we'd look around the sanctuary and we'd see all of these young adults, dozens and dozens of young adults, and for every context it's different. But for us, we were seeing young adults and we didn't know any of them. And we got the sense that nobody knew who they were and they didn't know anybody. There was just this huge disconnect in our church for young adults. And so we just felt this burden by God to do something about that, to make a difference in helping young adults connect. And so my wife and I, we weren't able to make a list because we didn't even know them. We didn't have church database metrics. We didn't have any way to kind of gather that information. So we started inviting them to lunch, strangers. We just started going up to young adults who were in their 20s and introducing ourselves. Say, hey, my name's Scott, and my wife would. My name is Kate, obviously. If that's not your name, then don't say it. But, we would just introduce ourselves and invite them to come have lunch with us.
But it was the same thing.
It was.
It's finding out who's there instead of just saying, we don't have anybody.
Right.
You do have people.
Yeah.
It's be intentional in finding them.
And so we'd have lunch. We'd just go out to have lunch. And then they made the list. And then we're like, okay, we got 2 young adults today. And they went on a list. We got their name and we started this was every week. We were tenacious about meeting young adults in the foyer, we would sit different places every time in the sanctuary. We never sat in the same place because then you're going to meet the same people because people are creatures of habit. So
Scott, let me ask
we
you
would
something.
sit in different places.
How did you go from the big list to the small list? Like, how did you pick from all these people that you're with to finding who you're going to start ministry
That's a
with?
great question,
How did you
Randy.
do that?
We did it the wrong way.
Okay, well, give me a quick.
Let me tell you. Let me tell you.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me tell you how we did it the wrong way. We took a show of hands. We asked for volunteers. We had a list of. We probably at that point, when my wife and I realized, we can't do this ourselves. We need a team. We asked for volunteers. We said, anybody want to be part of our team?
Yeah.
And we got 4 volunteers, and they were probably not the 4 volunteers we should have had on the team.
Yeah, it always works.
And we were working backwards for, they were great. We loved them, good people, but the chemistry was really hard. The chemistry, which we knew them, but we didn't know how they would interact with in a team setting.
Yeah.
And I wasn't on staff. I was just one of them. I was a volunteer. I wasn't even called to ministry at that point. So there were these awkward and very tense peer-to-peer kind of leadership and struggles that we had. So that was the wrong way, just taking volunteers. For us, the right way would have been to think strategically about who are the young adults that we have on that list that have the right character, that have the right chemistry with us to be part of a team that share our burden and our vision. Because you can get a young adult who's talented and who brings some skill to the table, but if they don't share a passion and a burden with us for reaching young adults, then I think it's not going to be as fruitful as if you had young adults who shared that burden.
Because if you don't have your core team that you're starting with right, you start bad. And so that was real key for us, is when we started and restarted a couple times with young adult ministry, if you didn't have the right people, I think Jim Collins calls it in Good to Great, the right people on the bus. If you don't have those right people, then you end up at the wrong destination, and everybody's mad when you get there.
Yeah.
And so
that is the truth for us, man. We were mad. Everybody was mad. Everybody was.
Because when you start, you just want people. I just need bodies, because bodies make the leader feel good. But the truth is, you need the right bodies to make the group feel good and to grow the group. And that for us was very similar to yours. We had this big list of names, but we just looked near the names, and we looked at some key people who had the abilities to lead and had the, for lack of a better term, popularity. They were well liked, and there's probably a better term than that, but people everyone connected with, just naturally gifted, and then used those people along the way.
Okay, so now that you have this list of people, and let's say it started out a little bit larger and now it's smaller, what do you do with this list? How do you really develop that core team?
Well, I'd interject at that point and say, at this point, if you're not careful, you can make a big strategic error, and I see this over and over and over again in the young adult groups I see. At this stage of the game, you got to be on the mission of the church. Your pastor has to be involved in the game. Doesn't mean he has to be telling you what you're supposed to do, but he's got to, or she's got to be the one who is giving you direction. Because what I find is that if you're not on the mission of the church, you're doing your own thing. And so you got to find out what the target, what the goal is, and what your leadership wants you to do. Because you could have the most successful young adult discipleship group in America, but if your leadership wants you to have the most successful activity-based group, you failed.
And I think that's going to vary greatly from church to church, because in our context specifically, we're in the Northeast and growing church, but my wife and I, when we sensed this burden, we talked to our senior pastor and we shared this vision with him, and we basically said, we got the go for it. There wasn't really any kind of transference of, this is what I want it to look like, this is what I want you to do with it.
What's it? Just go for it,
right.
but what's it?
But that's, go reach young adults, go connect the young adults in our church. That's what it was, because that's what we presented. And again, my wife and I were working full-time jobs, just volunteering our time, a lot of our time into trying to develop something for young adults in our church. And so when we went to our senior pastor and presented him with this idea, we said, we just have a burden for reaching the young adults in our church. We had never done anything like that in our church, nor had our senior pastor really had any experience with that. So we didn't know what to do. We were clueless. We learned a lot of things through mistakes. And he just said, you have my blessing. Really, that's how it was. It wasn't where he was going to help to chart the direction and vision of the ministry. It was, go ahead, you can do it. And so, and again, I think for every ministry volunteer leader, a lot of that depends on how much trust is built into their relationship with their senior pastor. He knew us. I grew up in the church. He knew us well. And so there was a great deal of trust that he inherently had with us, that he didn't have to worry that we were going to go build something that was in opposition to the ministry and mission and direction of the church at large.
I think a key word that I use and I think in terms of is leverage. So your church, y'all do life groups a lot. So you get big life groups. Well, obviously, when they're starting at you guys' place, you got to make sure you have good young adult life groups, because that's part of the focus of the church. We don't. We're not a small groups church, but we have other venues. So I had to make sure I leverage those opportunities. Secondly, I was talking to a girl a few weeks ago, I guess a few months ago now. She's starting a young adult group. So we don't do anything together. We don't do anything. And so start asking those questions. Who are there? What do you do? And I said, go back and find out what they're doing. And she found out that every Sunday after church, 9 young adults went to lunch. every Sunday.
That's a young adult group.
That's a young adult group.
Yeah,
There's
sure
pe-
is.
there's
It's a
churches
good
all
young
over the
adult
country
group, yeah.
thinking, I wish we could get 9
Yeah,
people
right,
together.
that's
And she's
right.
saying, we don't have a young adult group. And we're like, wait, you do. So she just inserted herself into the mix.
Yeah.
And then strategically started leveraging those kind of moments and that kind of stuff and turning what they naturally did into opportunities for growth and discipleship. Yeah. And from that core base of 9, turned that into what for them ended up being a Bible study on an off night. A couple years ago, it was trendy to have a young adult service. You guys have one. We do. Everybody I've talked to is like, we got to have together. You have a cool band and a worship.
You got
to have fog and lights.
Band, then it'll be great.
We came to realize we're not that big group that's going to do that. And if that's what they want, they're going to find a bigger church than us to go get that. So what is it we can do to help young adults? Yeah. And so we're not looking to copy what someone else has done. What we're doing is we're looking at creating opportunities for people to become lifelong followers of Jesus Christ, fully committed to Him. Yeah. And how do we do that? So leverage our opportunities.
That's good.
I think what I hear you saying, Randy, is it all revolves around food.
Now that is true.
Yeah.
Everything is food based,
it is,
and for young adults, we never eat alone. We're just talking before we were about every Sunday at lunch and every Sunday night at dinner at our place because we're a dinosaur. We're in the rural South, so we have Sunday night church and it's big. Yeah. But so we go to dinner. I mean, last week I think we had 65 people who were going to restaurants in different places just out of asking. Yeah. So we always make sure that there's young adults where we're eating.
And I think it's important for the listener to realize that it is so different depending on your culture that you can't hear what we're saying or what anybody else says and say that's the way to do it.
But eating is universal.
Eating is universal. We all need nourishment.
And that's a core value.
That's the truth.
It's a core value. It's a core. Food is really, and with all sincerity, it's the biggest item in my budget. Yeah. And we made a decision that we weren't going to be like college campuses and give really cheap, nasty pizza. We eat good. Yeah.
Could you call my senior pastor and tell him about your budget size for food?
Yeah. Well, at the group I lead, in fact, we meet Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. Mm-hmm. And I've heard other people say, how in the world do you get young adults out at 9 a.m. on a Sunday morning? Mm-hmm. Well, the key is we meet at Panera.
There you go.
And there's food, and there's bagels, and there's coffee. And people show up, and that's how we lead our group. Yeah.
It's a fairly good formula for spiritual transformation.
Yeah.
Coffee, Jesus, and community. Those things really seem to work well.
Not in that order, though.
Not in that
Jesus
order.
is first.
Well, let's put that first.
And then maybe coffee.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's
good stuff.
Sounds good, guys. Thanks.